Jack Thunder and the Fragments of Anima, Book 1, Air. Chapter 1, The Staff in the Mountain. A bright flash of lightning burst its way through the clouds. As dark as it was, morning had clearly arrived. This was how things always were on Tempest Island. Many of the floating cloud continents were pleasant places, warm and sunny with an abundance of rainbows, but this one was different. Buried within turbulent storm clouds, Tempest Island was known throughout the land of Alterus for its rather unpleasant weather. No matter the season, the island was always racked with sleet, lightning, and high winds. Wherever it drifted, it brought its weather with it, pouring down its misery on the lands below. Most folks would agree. Tempest Island is no place for any creature, great or small. But for a small being just stirring from his sleep, it was the perfect place to call home. Jack Thunder threw off his covers and strolled up to the window. He was a storm gremlin, a race of fun-loving but ill-tempered air fairies with blue skin, big noses, and long antennae that were well known for creating mischief throughout the land. They built their homes on cloud continents like Tempest Island, hardly minding the hostile weather. Jack Thunder was no exception. Despite the dreary weather, he couldn't help but smile. He loved how the raindrops falling from the sky resembled gemstones when the lightning flashed. He stared at them for a good while before turning his attention to the left. As much as he loved watching the rain, he couldn't do it all day. Today was going to be one of his busy days. He began to talk to himself as he dressed himself. Yet another morning. Another gloomy, gray morning, he mused as he pulled his gloves on. Not a speck of sunshine around. He put on his boots. That is how I know. He turned his gaze up towards his own reflection in the mirror as he shouted, "Today's gonna be a great day." Indeed, in his book, every day was a great day. And that was because he worked hard to make sure that every day was a great day. While older storm gremlins may have been content to spend their lives on the island, Jack Thunder loved going to the surface and exploring the lands that Tempest Island passed over the night before. It seemed like every day there was something new to discover. When he wasn't venturing down to the ground, he devoted his time to studying and practicing magic. That was what he was doing today. He had just mastered a new spell and was ready to move on to the next level. To perform spells at this level, however, he would need more raw energy. He was going to go to Mount Tempest to see if he could find any air crystals. Those would provide the power he needed for his practice. "Frosty!" he shouted. "I'm going out! I'm gonna explore Mount Tempest, see if I can find any air crystals," he continued as he packed his lunchbox. He waved goodbye to his sister as he stepped out the front door into the rain. The Storm Gremlin village itself sat in a grassy glen filled with hardy grasses and spear-leaved trees. Around him were blue stone huts not unlike his own house. As Jack Thunder inhaled the aroma of ozone, he looked around for Mount Tempest. He didn't have to look far. Mount Tempest was impossible to miss. He would have had to have been blind to miss a massive purple mountain so tall that it scraped the wild storm clouds of Tempest Island. He turned and headed in the direction of the mountain. Jack Thunder stood at the rocky foothills of Mount Tempest. He could already see exactly what he was looking for. Dotting the craggy cliffside were hundreds upon hundreds of tiny blue crystals. If there was one resource that Mount Tempest was known for, it was air crystals. Having been exposed to the abundance of air magic on the mountain, these crystals acted as batteries of anima to use for powerful air spells. As if to reflect this, they glowed faintly in the low light. Jack Thunder got to work on collecting them. Most of them were too small for him to use. There was only so much energy an air crystal could contain. and most of the crystals on the mountain were barely bigger than a grain of sand. Whenever he saw a larger one, he picked it up and inspected it, getting a feel for how much anima it contained. He gathered the ones that met his standards into his knapsack, throwing the rest back to the ground. It wasn't long before he'd made a considerable distance up the mountain, and it was becoming harder and harder to balance. One wrong move of his foot later, he was sliding down the mountain, scattering air crystals all across where he'd fallen. Startled but unharmed, he picked himself back up, groaning as he gathered the scattered air crystals one by one. He wondered if he had gathered enough crystals for the day when something caught his eye. Right behind him was a cave he had never seen before. Strange, he thought. I thought I knew every cave and cliff on this mountain. Even stranger, there seemed to be an eerie green glow emanating from the entrance. Now, if Jack Thunder had been cautious, he would have stayed away from that cave. Perhaps he would have even gotten his sister to help him investigate. But Jack Thunder was not that way. He was growing up, and he couldn't afford to have Frosty keep doing everything for him. He wanted to be like the heroes he'd read about in the stories. He wanted to be brave. And he really wanted to know what was in there. So, he entered the cave. Immediately, he could see that the path ahead was a steep drop, boulders piled up in a way that formed makeshift stairs for him to climb down from. And at the very bottom, he could spot faintly the source of the glow coming from an unseen enclave. Slowly, as not to slip and fall again, he hopped downward from boulder to boulder. It wasn't easy with how slippery and wet some of the boulders were, but he managed to make it down to the bottom without falling. As he picked it up, he could feel the raw power from the staff lacing through his bones. It was made of black metal, bearing a strong resemblance to iron and reflecting a bluish-gray in its own glow. The staff ended in 3 prongs from which serrated steel blades jutted out. In fact, it looked a lot like... No, that was impossible. He had read the stories about the War of the Wendigos and the heroes who had defeated the Heart of Darkness all those years ago. He had read about Stormbringer, the legendary staff that the hero of Air had used to help defeat the Wendigos. As the story went, it had been forged from the lightning atop Mount Tempest, and it had the power to summon a powerful tornado with just one swipe of the hand. But Stormbringer didn't glow green, did it? And besides, Stormbringer and the other fragments of Anima had been scattered to the far corners of Alterus after the rift was sealed. There was no way that this was the same staff. But if that was the case, why did he keep thinking Stormbringer? And why did it look almost exactly like the staff described in the tales? Perhaps it was just what he wanted to believe. He wanted to believe that he was destined to become a great hero himself, and that this was the first step on that journey. In any case, he couldn't just leave such a powerful magical artifact lying in a cave to rot. Grabbing the staff, he summoned a cloud with his magic and rode back to the entrance of the cave with it in his hand. Perhaps when he got back home he could figure this out. Chapter 2. The Powers of Air. Alright, Jack Thunder thought. If this really is Stormbringer, I want to see what it can do. He was standing in the middle of the field near the Storm Gremlin village where he lived. The staff thrummed with power. Jack Thunder knew that it was at least 10 times as powerful than any of the air crystals that were on Mount Tempest. But he wanted to know just how powerful it was. He closed his eyes, remembering the incantation for the spell he was working on. Then he held the staff aloft and recited, "Powers of rain and summer storm, I beseech you. Split the skies open and draw down a bridge of colors. Cast it from here to the land of Rainbow Country." As soon as he finished reciting those words, the staff once again began to glow, and green lightning bolts snaked around its prongs. As Jack Thunder decreed, the sky split open and a wide rainbow snaked down from the heavens until it touched the ground in front of him. Climbing on top of it, he stood at its highest point. In the distance, he could see that the rainbow touched down in Rainbow Country just as he decreed. It had really worked. Emboldened, Jack Thunder tried to see what else the staff could do. Every spell he threw at it, whether changing the winds, directing lightning strikes, or turning the rain to snow, the staff did with ease. Jack Thunder could hardly believe his luck. He raced home to tell Frosty. "Frosty, I'm home, and I brought a surprise!" Frosty looked up from what she was doing. She was much taller than Jack Thunder, sporting a dark blue jumpsuit and long, curved antennae. "What is it, Jackie?" Jack Thunder showed her the staff. "I found this in a cave on Mount Tempest. I think it might be Stormbringer, I'm not sure. If it's not Stormbringer, it sure looks like it, and it has a lot of the same powers and— Whoa!" In his excitement, Jack Thunder didn't notice that the staff had begun to glow again. Before Jack Thunder could realize what was going on, a massive green lightning bolt shot out of the staff's prongs. He was tossed to the floor like a rag doll, and a loud crack resonated throughout the room as the lightning bolt drove itself through the ceiling. When he got his senses back, Jack Thunder saw the hole in the ceiling and sighed. "Aw, man, not again." Frosty was not amused. "Again, Jackie? This has to be the 5th time you've put a hole in the ceiling. That and you could have hurt yourself." Jack Thunder groaned internally. It was this lecture again. "You could really end up hurting someone someday. In fact, if you're gonna treat this thing like a toy, you'd better put it right back where you found it." She directed him out the door, back towards Mount Tempest. The smaller storm gremlin silently fumed. "Put it back where you found it if you're gonna treat it like a toy," he scoffed to himself. "No one ever trusts me to do the responsible thing, but I'll show them. Hey, I'll go out and save the day somewhere right now." It was settled. He would prove he could be trusted with the staff. He would be like the heroes in his storybooks. They would all see what he was truly made of. But what should he do? He mulled over it for a while. That's when it hit him. "I've got it!" Jack Thunder recalled how just a few days ago Tempest Island had passed by the emerald woodland. The summer sun had done quite a number on the forest. The once emerald grass and trees had bleached themselves to a sickly straw yellow. The island had simply passed it by without bringing it even the smallest amount of precipitation. Jack Thunder was sure that if he were to bring a refreshing rainstorm to this parched land, the plants and animals would appreciate it, and Frosty would see that he could be trusted with the staff. He thought about how he would do this. The drought happened because it was too hot, right? And with how hot it was at this time of year, it would take something a bit bigger than his normal temperature change spells. But there were beings in Alterus who brought the cold with them wherever they went. North wind spirits weren't usually active at this time of year, but if he were to summon one over the Emerald Woodland, then it would cool down enough to start raining, he concluded. He snickered to himself. Yes, he liked that idea very much. Now, which way off this island? Ugh, I know it's around here somewhere, Jack Thunder griped as he floated through the sky on a cloud. He had been searching for hours, only stopping momentarily to eat his lunch. It couldn't have been this hard to find a giant forest, could it? Finally, he spotted it below. Ah, there it is. He stood up on the cloud. Just as dry as when I last saw it. This forest could really use a good washdown. He took a deep breath to calm his nerves, then recited the incantation. Here I summon the north winds. Come unto us. Use your power to quench the fever of these parched lands. The skies darkened around him as he spoke. Now arise! Blue lightning flashed around him as a long, slender form, black and blue with goat horns and about a mile in length, slipped from the clouds. The north wind spirit roared as the clouds began pouring rain around them. Before Jack Thunder could celebrate, however, the rain turned to snow. The emerald woodland was blanketed in white as summer turned to winter before his eyes. Wait, what the... I wanted to cool things off, but not this much. He started to panic. What am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? How am I gonna explain this? He stopped himself. No, I can't think like that. I can fix this on my own. He raised the staff once again. Here I summon the southern wind. Come unto this land. Turn the snow to rain and winter to spring. A hole opened up in the clouds. Now arise! Once again a wind spirit slipped through the clouds, only this one was red and black with stag antlers. It fired a beam of pure heat from its mouth at the storm clouds, turning the snow to rain. Ha ha! It's working! Jack Thunder cheered. That's when the two wind spirits saw each other. They hissed as they began to circle each other like sharks in the ocean. They circled faster and faster until a funnel of air began to form where they were circling. The skies turned a menacing green as the air funnel turned into a full-fledged tornado. Jack Thunder's face dropped. Or not. Chapter 3. Facing Tempests. A rogue lightning bolt split through the sky, slicing through the storm cloud Jack Thunder stood on. He plummeted through the sky, hitting many clouds on the way down as the emerald woodland rapidly rose to meet him. He crashed through the canopy of the forest and landed in the underbrush below, lucky as he had fallen head first, and if he'd landed on the ground, he might have not been able to get back up. Not that he wasn't hurt now. Ah! I had to hit every cloud on the way down, didn't I? The storm gremlin griped as he rubbed his head. Where the heck even am I? He looked around. The trees blocked out most of the wind and sleet, but even they struggled and broke under the brunt of the storm. That's when he noticed a pair of violet eyes peering at him from the shadows. He grabbed the staff beside him in the bushes and brandished it in their direction. Stay back. I don't want any trouble, he barked, hoping the quiver in his voice didn't give him away. The eyes merely stared back at him. Jack Thunder's trembling intensified. He internally cursed himself for letting his fear show in front of a potential enemy. This was not how heroes were supposed to behave. Suddenly, a teal and gold forest dragon stepped from the shadows. It was the biggest he'd ever seen. A storm gremlin? What are you doing in these woods? And in this weather? Ah! Jack Thunder was not expecting the dragon to talk. Oh goodness, you scared me. Small tears gathered in his eyes. I've made a huge mistake. I was trying to summon a rainstorm here, but it all went haywire, and now there's a massive tornado headed right for us. If I don't find some way to stop it, it'll tear right through this forest. He gasped for breath as he finished. The dragon turned her gaze up to the sky. Oh gosh, what are you going to do? That's what I'm trying to figure out. The storm gremlin racked his brain for answers, trying not to freak out. Wait, I remember something. He thought back to a few years ago. He had been trying to clear the clouds out of the field behind their house. Rather than just throw them into the sky like he had been used to doing, he decided to create a miniature whirlwind to clear them out a lot faster. Unfortunately, he hadn't thought about the possibility of it running out of control and chasing him across the yard. Frosty ended up banishing it, but what was the incantation she used? Ugh, I wish I could remember. he lamented. But he wasn't one to give up without a fight. He gazed up at the sky with a determined expression. Still, I've got to try. Jack Thunder turned to the dragon. I think I know what to do. Can you fly in this weather? The dragon looked uncertain. I can try. I've flown in storms before. Good. I'll need to get up high for what I'll need to do. He hated asking this of her, but he knew that if he were to materialize a cloud to try to get up to the tornado, he would get sucked in. At least this way, they both stood a better chance of making it out unharmed. As he rode into the sky on her back, he hoped fervently that he could do this before they got sucked in. No, he was certain. He had to. He couldn't afford to doubt himself now. Giving in to his misgivings would only ensure both of their deaths. As they flew closer to the tornado, he could see the wind spirits glaring at him and the dragon. They hissed as they began to launch lightning bolts and heat beams towards them. They ducked and dove, evading every obstacle the wind spirits threw at them, flying upwards over the lightning-filled storm clouds, banking left to dodge an errant heat beam, diving straight downward. They were surrounded by the enemy's sniper fire from all sides. Eventually, though, they got close enough for Jack Thunder to cast his spell. "All right, I think I'm close enough. Just hold steady," he yelled over the howling winds. "Spirits of the north and south, I release you from your task. Cease this storm and come back no more." And with that, a bolt of pure green lightning shot from the staff. It made its way upwards, splitting the clouds and tearing an ever-expanding hole into them as the spell took hold. A bright, piercing light emanated from the staff, blinding the two wind spirits. Jack Thunder had never strained his magic like this before. Every fiber in his being was screaming for him to stop. Through the chaos, however, he could see the tornado beginning to dissipate. This gave him the strength to keep channeling, even as he felt like his body would give out at any moment. And with a final burst of energy, the lightning blasted away all of the clouds, ripping the tornado apart completely. The wind spirits fled as the sun came back out, shining down on the emerald woodland like it was a brand new day. Chapter 4. A Lesson About Responsibility. Jack Thunder huffed and puffed, unable to catch his breath. That spell had taken a lot more out of him than he thought it would. "Oh man, I think I'm gonna..." He collapsed on the dragon's back. The dragon looked back at him, concerned. As annoyed as she might have been about what this storm gremlin did, she couldn't be mad at him. Not when he had strained himself this much. She knew he was too weak to get back home on his own. She recalled how she had seen Tempest Island pass by the forest a few days back and figured that the island was where the storm gremlin lived. Or at least it was the closest place where he'd be able to heal and replenish his magic. She took off again towards the direction of where she'd last seen the island. Before long, the dragon could see the unmistakable purple floating mountain in the distance. This was Tempest Island, all right. She touched down on the edge of the island, keeping an eye on Jack Thunder to see if he was all right. He slowly stirred and opened his eyes. He thought about the emerald woodland. He thought about what could have happened due to his carelessness. About how he forced a dragon who had nothing to do with this to risk her life to help clean up this mess. It all made him sick to his stomach. "What seems to be troubling you, young one?" I really loused up this time, didn't I?" He couldn't even look her in the eye. "I mean, I just wanted to bring some rain to help with the drought, and I nearly destroyed your home with a tornado instead." He sighed. "I guess Frosty was right. I'm not responsible enough for this kind of power." The dragon didn't know what to say. Who's Frosty?" she finally opted to ask. He turned to her. "Frosty's my sister. She's probably looking for me right—" "Jackie!" There you are! I've been looking all over for you! Jack Thunder cringed. He must have worried her when he didn't come back, as if his little stunt with the staff didn't rack him with enough guilt. And, she turned her gaze up at the dragon. Who might you be? The dragon smiled. Oh, you must be Frosty. I'm Scylla of the Emerald Woodland. Your brother told me about you. Jack Thunder tried to hide behind Scylla's wings. Some part of him thought that if Frosty couldn't see him, he didn't have to face his actions in front of her. It was a cowardly move, and a ridiculous one, but he couldn't help it. He peered out from his hiding spot. He needn't have bothered. She saw him anyway. He did? What were you doing in the Emerald Woodland? Tears filled his eyes once again. Frosty, He couldn't take it anymore. You were right, okay? I wanted to show you I could be responsible with the staff. I tried to summon a north wind spirit to heal the drought here, but when it started snowing, I summoned a south wind spirit to warm it up enough to rain. Instead, they started fighting and a tornado nearly tore through the place. He gasped for breath as he reached the end of his rant. He shoved the staff into Frosty's hands. You're just gonna have to take it away from me. Frosty was silent for a good moment. She tried to process all that her brother had told her. Oh, she said at last. Well, that explains that nasty spat in the east earlier. Jack Thunder propped his hand against Scylla's neck as he felt faint once again. That's why Scylla's here, he panted. She helped me while I was putting out the storm. Frosty gasped in shock. You extinguished a tornado yourself? Scylla answered for him. Yes, I flew him close to the tornado, but he banished it. He used up all his magic. At that moment, Jack Thunder collapsed to his knees, unable to support his own weight anymore. Frosty picked up her shaking brother, gently placing him on her back. Come on, let's go home. He snuggled up to her shoulder, once again too exhausted to keep his eyes open. As for you, she turned to the staff, you're going into my private study. I want to look at your powers. She wasn't intent on letting him have it again, but she got an odd feeling about the staff, and she wanted to figure out if it really was related to Stormbringer as he had suggested that morning. It couldn't be coincidence that it looked exactly how the legends described it, and it contained enough power to create and destroy a tornado all on its own. What knockoff could do something like that? Ugh, anyways, she turned to Scylla. Thank you for helping my brother and bringing him home. I'm sorry he caused you so much trouble. He means well, but he doesn't always think before he acts. Don't worry. The forest is not harmed. He actually helped us by bringing the storm, Scylla affirmed. If the spirits hadn't started fighting, it would have been perfect for us. Ha! Well, he's not going to be summoning anything for a long time. Not until he's much older. Frosty rolled her eyes. Are you going to be alright getting home? I flew close to a massive twister only a half hour ago. I'm sure I'll be fine. Well said. Frosty couldn't help but think. She watched Scylla disappear into the distance. She turned to her brother on her shoulder. Anyways, I think you've learned your lesson. I guess so, he agreed as he came to. I just hope Scylla makes it home safe. I'm sure she's fine, Jackie. They were silent as they made the long trek home. It was only about 15 minutes back to the Storm Gremlin village, but to Jack Thunder, it felt more like hours. Finally, they arrived. Well, here we are. Jack Thunder slid off of his sister's shoulder and made the journey back to his bedroom. He'd had more than enough adventuring for one day. Ugh, it's getting late. Never thought I'd be so tired. He started getting himself ready for bed. He went through the motions of his bedtime routine, brushing his teeth, peeling his jumpsuit off, and fixing the sheets on the bed. He couldn't help but think about how much trouble he'd gotten himself into that day. Frosty was sure going to let him hear it in the morning. Ugh. He didn't want to think about that right now. He pulled the covers over his body and lay down. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the soft rain and thunder outside his window. Eventually, his eyelids began to droop, and he smiled to himself. He was back home. He was in his bed. He was safe. He could worry about the mess he'd made tomorrow morning. Interlude 1. The Legend of Stormbringer. San held his breath. This was the moment of truth. After those monsters had decimated his hometown, he had taken it upon himself to find a way to halt the threat. Sure, he was an outcast, known only by the number in his birth order, but that wasn't important now. Even the sages in his commune knew that. That's why they had opened the Greyfeather Temple to the public. He dived straight in, learned all about weapons and enchantment techniques. He learned about magic staves and what materials they were made from for each element. He discovered that for his own element, air, he would need black metal and air crystals. Black metal to conduct the electricity from the lightning it produced, and air crystals as a source of power. Both of those things could be found atop Mount Tempest. After much painstaking searching and labor, he had done it. The staff was nearly complete, but it didn't have enough power to stand a chance against the Heart of Darkness just yet. That's what he was here for. He just needed one more thing. One more thing that would imbue the staff with the essence of air itself. Something that would turn this little art project into the most powerful magical weapon anyone inside or outside the commune had ever seen. A bolt of lightning from atop Mount Tempest. He raised the staff, aiming it at the center of the swirling clouds. He recited the incantation. By the power of Anima itself, I dedicate this staff to the path of air. Come unto us and imbue this staff with the raw essence of storms, of swirling tornadoes, of bright and sunny skies. May it serve us well in our battle against the forces of Null. The storm clouds above his head began swirling faster and faster, as if he were standing in the center of a great twister. The wind roared as bolts of lightning of all colors sliced the sky back and forth. Suddenly, like an eagle diving down to seize its prey, a great flash of electricity shot straight down through the column of clouds, striking the staff in San's hand. It surged throughout the staff, bathing every inch of it in its power, but San was not harmed. When he looked back at the staff, he could see that it resonated with pure air magic and now bore 3 blades atop its prongs, each in the shape of a lightning bolt. The gemstone in the center glowed green with energy. The spell had worked. Chapter 5. The Visitor. That can't be right. Frosty stared down at the passage in the book she was reading. The staff sat on the table beside her. She had been keeping it in her private study, away from her brother's reach. Ever since, she had been trying to figure out where it came from and what kinds of powers it had. At first, she thought that it might have just been something some adventurer dropped in the cave. The more she researched, though, the more one thing stuck out to her. Everyone in Alterus knew of the War of the Wendigos, of the 6 champions who stood up for them all. But Frosty had never bothered to really read the history of the war, particularly the descriptions of the 6 Fragments of Anima. That was what stuck with her now. The staff bore an uncanny resemblance to how the air staff Stormbringer was described in the book. She looked back over at it. It's made of black metal. It has the same gemstone in the center. It has the same 3 jagged blades. Was it really possible? No. She read on. Stormbringer had been blasted across Alterus along with the other anima fragments. There was no way it could have ended up on Tempest Island, could it? After all, Stormbringer was created on Tempest Island. That it would land back there and end up deep within a cave didn't seem particularly likely to her. And besides, air magic didn't glow green, did it? Frosty sighed. If it wasn't Stormbringer, it obviously was still a very powerful staff. Jack Thunder's little stunt back in the Emerald Woodland was proof of that. She placed the staff back on a rack on the wall in her study, then left and locked the door behind her. She could figure this out later. What was important now was that he didn't get his hands on it again. Some days the sky turns dark and the sun fades out of sight. When you feel yourself sinking down, that is when you must take flight. Jack Thunder was singing to himself as he floated past Tempest Island on a moody rain cloud. He didn't really feel like working on his magical studies today. In fact, he didn't really feel like doing anything right now. He couldn't stop thinking about how badly his attempt to end the drought in the Emerald Woodland the other day had gone. Frosty had warned him about the staff and he hadn't listened. And because of that, he nearly destroyed the forest. Now the staff was sitting in Frosty's study. He wasn't allowed to even go near it. Of all the failures and frustrations his studies had caused him, none of them were ever as shame-inducing as this one. How was he supposed to move on and keep working as if it had never happened? That's why he was here, lying on a rain cloud and floating through the sky, singing himself the song he'd made up in an attempt to cheer himself up. He wasn't really paying attention to what was on the ground, so you can imagine his surprise when a sudden cry came out of nowhere. Huh? What was that? He asked no one in particular as he jolted up to a sitting position. He looked around but couldn't see anything. I know I heard something. Now, what did I hear? Another cry, this one coming from his left. He peered over the side of his cloud to locate the source of the noise. What he saw prompted him to fly straight down to the surface of the island and dispel the cloud he'd been riding on, his prior gloom all but forgotten. Lying on the ground was a weather wyvern whelp, too young to fly back to safety, with eggplant-colored scales and stubby horns. It seemed to have fallen from its nest and was now crying out for its mother. Jack Thunder ducked behind a nearby rock. He knew that it was dangerous to approach a weather wyvern whelp, and he didn't want to risk getting attacked by an angry mama wyvern. Powerful magical artifacts were one thing. Getting torn to pieces was quite another. He just wanted to make sure the mama came back so that he didn't have to worry anymore. But as time passed, the storm gremlin came to think more and more that the whelp had been abandoned. He didn't even see any other weather wyverns in the sky, let alone trying to rescue the whelp. He knew that he couldn't raise it by himself, but he couldn't just leave it either. Slowly, tenuously, he inched towards the whelp. It heard him approaching and turned around. It backed itself up, glaring and hissing at him, until it backed itself up against a boulder. Jack Thunder was undeterred. He continued to stroll towards the whelp, trying not to make any sudden movements. The whelp grew more frantic at first, hissing and snapping in the gremlin's direction. Jack Thunder instinctively stopped. He didn't want to risk getting bitten. So what should he do? He remembered something from one of his spell books. It was a hypnotic spell, designed to soothe angry or scared animals. It was a simple spell, having no incantation, but an effective one. He held out his left hand, closing his eyes and focusing on calming his nerves. It worked, and a greenish aura began to shine around his hand. One wave of said hand later, and the aura dissipated. The effect was immediate. The whelp immediately stopped hissing and snapping. Its muscles relaxed and it slumped to the ground. Only a scant minute later, and it was completely asleep. With what strength he could muster, Jack Thunder picked up the whelp that was nearly as big as he was and hoisted it onto a new cloud that he formed. Once again he soared high in the sky. Getting the whelp out of danger was the easy part. Now he just needed to find someone to take care of it. San knew he had to go the moment he saw the signs. He thought he'd never have to deal with this ever again. After the war, everyone seemed so ecstatic. They held him up as a hero, just like with the others. It made him sick. They could never be bothered to care about him when he was a lowly outcast, and now they were worshipping him? All because he was useful to them now? Truth be told, he never saw himself as extraordinary. He was just doing what he needed to do to save himself and his home. Perhaps in recognition of this, he never gave himself a proper name even after the war. He only referred to himself by the number of the order he hatched in for his clutch. He had fled to the frozen peaks of the Razor Frost mountain range, intent on living out the rest of his days in isolation. He made his nest on an icy peak, subsisting on wild berries and roots. As much as he struggled with hunger every single day, he knew that it was better than facing them and their insipid praise. But when he saw the looming threat on the horizon, one that threatened to be the end of Alterus once and for all that didn't matter. It didn't matter that he hadn't seen any other Altarians in 11 years. It didn't matter that his sparse diet whittled his figure down to nothing. Alterus was more important. That's why he was here. He could sense a strong presence here, one greater than Tempest Island's native air magic could produce on its own. No, this was different. Though he couldn't tell for sure, he thought that the strong energy may be coming from his old staff. San snapped out of his thoughts when he heard a voice shouting at him. He looked up. Atop a small cloud was a little storm gremlin, and he was yelling and waving at him. "What seems to be the matter, little gremlin?" San shouted back. The cloud descended until it dissipated on the ground. Standing in front of San was the storm gremlin, adorned in a pine green jumpsuit and rainforest green gloves and boots, staring pleadingly at him. On the ground in front of him was a purple weather wyvern whelp, curled up and fast asleep. "I found him near the mountain. I don't know how he got there, but he needs help. His mama didn't come back for him. I think he's an orphan." The storm gremlin continued to babble frantically, overloading the older Tengu with information. From what San could tell, though, the storm gremlin had found an orphaned whelp and was looking for someone to help him take care of it. He knelt down and inspected the whelp for any signs of ill health. From what he could tell, the whelp was more or less healthy, maybe a bit undernourished, but it didn't seem to have any severe wounds or infections. Nothing he couldn't handle. He picked up the whelp and placed it in his arms. "Where do you live?" he asked the storm gremlin. The storm gremlin turned and motioned towards a village of stone huts. This must be the storm gremlin village, San thought. He followed the gremlin to the center of the village. The two of them stopped near the center of the village in front of one of the huts. "I live here. I just need to get Frosty out here." He began calling out, "Frosty? Frosty! Please come out! We need your help!" Frosty emerged from the doorway. "What is it now, Jackie?" She looked up and was startled at the sight of the strange birdman at the door, holding a baby weather wyvern in his arms. "Ah! Oh, never seen you in these parts before." Jack Thunder jumped to explain. "He was just wandering around the island. I found this weather wyvern that had been abandoned, and I wanted to find someone who could help me raise it. He seemed kind enough, so I wanted to bring him here to see what else we could do." Frosty looked back up at the Tengu, who nodded to confirm. "I'm sorry to bother you. I don't come from around here. I came back here to see if I could find the Stormbringer. The Heart of Darkness may yet be on the horizon, and I'll need it if I want to stand a chance against it again." The Heart of Darkness? Hadn't the Heart of Darkness been banished years ago? That's what Jack Thunder read in his storybooks anyway. So why was this Tengu saying that it was on the horizon? Well, Jackie here did find a strange staff in one of the caves on Mount Tempest a few days ago. It looks an awful lot like how Stormbringer is described, but I doubt that it's actually Stormbringer. But what about the wyvern? Jack Thunder interjected. The two continued to talk over him. A staff in a cave? Can I take a look at it? I hate to ask this of you, but this is important. But the wyvern... Jack Thunder was starting to get irritated. Well, it's not like we have any use for it now. I forbade Jackie from using it again, and it's just sitting in my study right now. Guys! What are we supposed to do about the wyvern? Now we got their attention. Both of them were looking at Jack Thunder. Frosty glared at him. Jackie, we're having a conversation right now. Don't interrupt. No. No, he's right. We need to figure out what to do with this whelp here, Son interjected. The whelp stirred, then rolled over in his arms. All three of them exchanged glances for the longest time. No one knew what to say. Finally, Frosty broke the silence. All right, Jackie, I'll let you help raise the wyvern on one condition. She looked at Son. I want you to be in charge of raising it, and I want Jack Thunder to help you. He doesn't always think about the consequences of his actions before he does them, so I want you to be in charge. Can you do that for him? Son nodded. I'll do the best I can. Chapter 6. At Home. So it was settled. The weather wyvern stayed. But there was one more question on Jack Thunder's mind. Hey, where are we going to keep it? Do you live close by? Son froze. He didn't know if he wanted to reveal where he had been all this time. He knew he couldn't go back to the Razor Frost range with this orphaned wyvern in tow. It was far too cold for a creature like that to survive. He would need to stay close by. If you don't have a place to stay, we have a spare room, Frosty offered. It wouldn't be too much trouble. That room has been sitting empty anyway, ever since... Frosty's face dropped for a second. Well, that's another story. Let me show you around. Son nodded, following Frosty out of the front room. So he's staying, Jack Thunder thought. First the incident with the staff, then the wyvern, then the Tengu staying with them. It was all too much right now. He walked over to the couch and sat down. He could hear Son and Frosty talking, but he couldn't make out what they were saying. Eventually, Jack Thunder could hear footsteps coming from the other room. Jack Thunder snapped out of his thoughts when he caught sight of Son poking his head out from the hallway, looking at him. Oh, I didn't see you there for a second. So, how do you like it here? Did you see my room yet? He asked, unable to stop talking. The Tengu nodded, and Jack Thunder followed him into the hallway. From there, Jack Thunder could see the little wyvern curled up on a bed pillow in the room that usually went unused. Eventually, they would have to move it outside, but for now it could rest in a makeshift nest. The storm gremlin sighed with relief. The wyvern was all right. So, now that we're living together, I guess I should introduce myself. My name's Jack Thunder. I live here in the village on Tempest Island. I've never seen you around here before. Where are you from? Razor Frost Range, Son answered tersely. It wasn't that he disliked the storm gremlin. He just didn't want him finding out who he truly was. Oh, I didn't think anyone lived in Razor Frost Range except for the people who run the Diamond Citadel, Jack Thunder replied, referring to the massive, crystalline palace-turned-dojo that resided underneath the expansive and perilous mountain range. It was one of the only things that attracted visitors to the Razor Frost Range, especially in winter when temperatures dropped to deadly lows. Well, that and the rainbow of crystals found under the mountains. That explains why you don't look so good. It was true. All those years in the Razor Frost Range had taken their toll. San hadn't looked at himself in the mirror for all those years, but when he caught a glimpse of himself, he noticed just how much weight he'd lost. He looked too frail to fly. The feathers in his wings were also unkempt and falling out, leaving many bald patches in their wake. Between those two things, he shouldn't have been able to make it to Tempest Island by himself, even in the summer when the weather in the Razor Frost Range was mild. But somehow he managed. I suppose so. Some might have seen Jack Thunder's blunt attitude as rude. Certainly his sister would have scolded him for running his mouth like that. But San admired it in a way. It reminded him a lot of himself when he had joined the Six Champions. Sorry if that was rude. Frosty's always getting on me about that. She says it's not appropriate and that I'll get in trouble with someone someday. I don't know. I guess I just say whatever I'm thinking, Jack Thunder apologized. Just then, the wyvern whelp stirred. It opened its eyes and looked directly at the two. That's when Jack Thunder remembered. He needed to give the little guy a name. But what should he call it? In Jack Thunder's mind, the name should strike terror into the hearts of his enemies, whomever his enemies were. It should be a name worthy of the majesty of a creature that breathed out lightning and fierce winds wherever it went. Then it hit him. Razor. He'd gotten that name from a character in one of his many books. He always thought the name was cool. I think I'll name him Razor, Jack Thunder proclaimed, scooting over to the wyvern's side. It seemed to like the name too. Its eyes glinted with recognition. San sighed. Razor it is. Chapter 7. Rise and Fall. A few days later, San made his way to Frosty's study. While he enjoyed staying at the Storm Gremlin siblings' house, he knew he couldn't stay forever. He knocked on the door. Frosty poked her head out. Oh, is there something you need? As soon as San saw the staff mounted on the wall, he knew. Yes, there was no doubt. This was Stormbringer. Ah, yes, that is definitely Stormbringer. I can tell. How? Frosty was confused. San sighed. He didn't want to do this. He reached into his pocket and pulled something out. Frosty was shocked when she saw what it was. It was a silver medallion with the symbol of air emblazoned on it. The same one that the air champion of Alterus had worn all those years ago. San? Yes, I am that, San. But that's not important. The world needs my aid. The Heart of Darkness is coming back. I don't know where the others are, but if we don't stop it, it will consume this land. There will be nothing left. All of a sudden, San felt woozy. He fell to his knees and panted, trying to get his bearings. Instead, it seemed as though the world swirled and faded away with each passing moment. No matter how low to the ground he sank, he still felt as if the ground was tilting, and if he let go for a single second, he would go sliding off the edge of the world. He could hear Frosty and Jack Thunder shouting, but it sounded like they were underwater. He couldn't make out anything they were saying. The last thing he saw before everything faded to black was two shapes. A tall blue one and a small green one. Both were looming over him as he lost his grip on consciousness. When San came to, he was lying down on a soft bed. Oh, good. I thought we'd lost you. Lost him? San bolted upright. What? I'm all right. I just got dizzy for a second, that's all. You did a lot more than get dizzy for a second. You'd fainted on the floor, Jack Thunder confirmed. Frosty nodded. He's right. We both saw you pass out. And my brother's right. You don't look like you've been taking care of yourself. You just stay right there and I'll fix you some soup. Jackie, please keep an eye on him. Jack Thunder saluted her with a silly look on his face as she exited the room. He pulled himself onto the bed and sat down. Figures, San thought. The world needs my aid once more, and I pass out from starvation just as I'm about to get the one thing that can help me. Clearly I'm in no shape to handle this on my own. But I can't sit here and wait to get healthy while the heart of darkness is at large. Someone else will have to take over for me. But who? Mister? What are you thinking about? San looked over at the storm gremlin, who was now only a foot away from his face. His first thought was, this child. But that was ridiculous. He was so young, couldn't be older than 13. And didn't his sister say that he had been forbidden from using the staff again? Something about him nearly destroying the emerald woodland? Then again, if he were to watch the child, he could teach him how to use the staff responsibly, how to tap into its powers. And as ridiculous as it sounded, the little storm gremlin might just be the hope that Alterus needed. Mister? San snapped out of his train of thought. Yes, young one? Frosty brought the soup. San looked over and saw Frosty standing in the doorway. Sure enough, she had the soup cupped in her hands. As he ate, he shifted his gaze periodically, from Jack Thunder to Frosty to the ceiling and back. The more he thought, the more salient it seemed. Yes, he decided. Jack Thunder was this world's best shot at getting a new air champion. From his perspective, anyway. Miss Frosty, can we talk in private? Sure. Jackie, can you go to your room, please? Now Jack Thunder was very curious. Did this have to do with him? But he didn't want to make things harder for San than they already were, so he left. Frosty shut the door behind him. But that didn't mean he wasn't going to listen in. He couldn't make out much of their conversation, but he could make out a few parts. You really think so? Even knowing what happened with him and the staff? He already knows how to use it, he just needs some direction. But I can't bear the thought. He'll be fine. I've already vowed to take care of the wyvern. I can take care of him, too. Yep, they were definitely talking about him. After hearing that, he rushed to his room. Could it be? Was San really gonna teach him to use the staff? He didn't want to get his hopes up, but... He noticed Frosty standing in his doorway. Her expression was one of uncertainty, but resignation. Jackie, I just talked to San. He says he can teach you how to use the staff, but you're gonna have to promise to follow his instructions and take them seriously. Jack Thunder nodded profusely. Anything they said, that's what he'd do. Interlude 2. San's Scars. San clutched Stormbringer tightly. The figure in front of him was doubled over, tar-black liquid spewing from his mouth. It was coming. The Wendigo was coming. San just had to keep channeling a little longer. With a final retch, it came out. A long, serpentine figure of pure darkness with eyes that smoldered like hot coals emerged from the figure's mouth. Immediately it screeched and gave chase. San had to be quick on his feet to dodge as it rushed at him with blinding speed. It struck the wall behind him, cracking it. Undeterred, it whipped itself around, sprouting claws upon claws to rend the troublesome Tengu to shreds. San charged up Stormbringer again, but he was instantly surrounded by a flurry of whirling blades. He felt one tear through his cheek and another slice through his ear, but even so he charged up the staff and struck back at the Wendigo, blasting the claws to pieces with bright green lightning. Mallow, the water champion, charged the Wendigo from behind him, letting loose a flurry of kicks. The Wendigo roared in frustration and tried to swipe at her. She sang a 3-note melody, causing it to reel back in pain. Seeing his chance, San struck the Wendigo again, this time with a torrent of rain so fierce it melted the evil shapeshifter into a puddle. The two saw their chance. Back to the flip side with you and your hate. Stormbringer and the Sea Stone lit up simultaneously, green and blue respectively. You have no place in this land of dreams. Their glow turned to a bright white. We belong to Alterus. Alterus is ours. The glow began to pulse violently, a rainbow aura forming around it. Now be gone! The light shot out towards the Wendigo. It shrieked in rage and agony as the bright light ripped it apart piece by piece. It was thrown back into the rift from whence it came, which sealed shut on impact. "San, look! Your cheek! It's bleeding!" San snapped out of his thoughts. The fairy he had rescued from the Wendigos was looking at him in horror. That's when he saw it. The blood. A massive slice had been carved from his cheek. His ear didn't fare much better. He couldn't see much, but he could tell there were a couple of chunks missing. Only then did it start to hurt. Chapter 8. Advanced Studies. "That's it! You're doing great!" Jack Thunder's training session was going well. San was surprised. The little guy already knew so much about magic. He should have expected as much. The storm gremlin had managed to summon 2 wind spirits with that staff after all. He had the power and the skill. He just needed to learn self-control. Mr. San?" Jack Thunder abruptly cut out his spell. The rain cloud he'd been generating with it dissipated. "I don't mean to be rude, but why are we doing this? I can already summon rain clouds without the staff. I've been doing so for years. I want to do something really big, something really special." "You heard what your sister said. She doesn't quite trust you to be able to handle this much power by yourself yet. That's what I'm here for." Jack Thunder snorted. Of course. Frosty had to tell San about the incident. Still, he had the wisdom to keep his mouth shut. If San was teaching him at all, it meant that somebody trusted that he could learn to be responsible, and Jack Thunder didn't want to prove otherwise. He took a deep breath, half out of exasperation and half to steady himself. "So, what's next? It seems as though you're catching on to this. I assume you've learned the Wendigo banishing incantation?" Of course he'd learned the Wendigo banishing incantation. How could he not have? Since the war, it had become custom practice to teach young fairies the incantation as soon as they were able. Frosty taught him how to use it as soon as he was able to speak. He nodded. "Okay, I'd like to see you demonstrate for me. Pretend that rock over there is a Wendigo." Jack Thunder obliged. He pointed the prongs of the staff at the rock. He concentrated hard, and little green sparks began to form around the gemstone in the center. He began reciting the incantation. "Back to the flip side with you and your hate." The sparks began to swarm like angry bees. "You have no place in this land of dreams." The center of the gemstone began to glow. "We belong to Alterus. Alterus is ours." The gem shone bright white, shimmering with all colors of the rainbow. "Now be gone." As soon as he uttered the last word, the light in the center of the staff snaked around the prongs of the staff, blasting forward in a cascade of blinding light. The blast shifted to all colors of the rainbow as it enveloped the rock, continuing to blast forward in a straight line. As powerful as it was, it did not harm anything that it touched. The trees and grass it invariably enveloped in its light did not burn. Eventually, the light cut out. "Oh good, you already know the incantation." "Of course, I learned it when I was just 4, Jack Thunder affirmed. "They're teaching it to everyone these days?" San had been so out of the loop for so long. "Yeah, something about it being safer if everyone knew it." San couldn't disagree. The war had taken so many lives in part because not enough Altarians knew how to fend against the Wendigos. "So you already know what it does?" "Yeah. It strips all the power from a Wendigo and throws them back into the rift they came from," Jack Thunder recited from memory. "And it seals the rift they came from. When am I gonna fight some real Wendigos?" Hopefully never, San thought. But he kept that thought to himself. About a month later, Jack Thunder was sitting in his room, pouting. He had learned so much from San's teaching, but he still hadn't actually banished a Wendigo. He had spent so much time perfecting his magic, learning how to use the staff, but he still hadn't put it to good use. He was so sick and tired of waiting. "Razor, nothing I do is working. I've been studying and studying, and I still haven't faced off against a Wendigo. I feel like I've been doing this all for nothing. Razor simply yawned and circled around before lying down and going back to sleep. Even the wyvern was sick of hearing his ranting. Jack Thunder headed outside. Maybe a change of scenery would help him feel better. At the very least, sitting in his room feeling sorry for himself wasn't helping matters. His nerves settled as he inhaled the smell of ozone. He thought he would have gotten used to the smell by now, but today, something was not right. The scent was different somehow. He looked around. The village was the same as ever. I'm probably just tired. This past month had been rather hectic for him. So many late nights up studying air spells, mastering them one by one, learning every tip and trick he could to finally face off against the Wendigos. All for nothing, he thought bitterly. He continued on his path out of the village. As Jack Thunder made his way to Mount Tempest, he couldn't help but feel that the air around him was colder than usual. He stopped, confused. It shouldn't have been this cold. It wasn't winter. The summer solstice had been but a scant month and a half ago. And Tempest Island was nowhere near the polar regions that saw ice and snow year-round. Besides, this wasn't the wintry kind of cold, the kind of cold that turned the rains of the island into snow flurries. No, this was an unnatural kind of cold. An empty kind of cold, like the air itself had been robbed of life. Almost as if... Jack Thunder snapped to attention and raced back to the village. If his hunch was correct, the village could be in real danger. Perhaps there was something he missed when he looked around for the first time. He hadn't noticed it before, but the village was just as cold as the mountain was. Furthermore, he didn't see any storm gremlins anywhere. Normally, he could catch a few storm gremlins out riding on clouds or causing mischief, but today, he could mistake the town for a ghost town. Something was not right here. Where is everyone? He mused to himself. He began looking around, hoping to catch any glimpse of another soul around. With each passing minute, he became more and more unnerved. Was this some kind of trick? If so, this was the most elaborate prank he had ever seen any storm gremlin play on anyone. Okay, very funny. You can come out now. The response was not what he was expecting. Instead of all the storm gremlins coming out and having a good laugh, he was met with a soft, pained groan. He whipped around. To his relief, he had found another storm gremlin. Melanie Starstruck was her name. She wore a minty green jumpsuit and bore the image of a star on her chest. At least, her suit was green. Now it seemed to have been bleached to a sickly gray. It wasn't just her jumpsuit. Her entire form looked to be drained of color, turning a joyless gray that was almost white. She staggered out the door, her eyes lidded and dull. Jack Thunder rushed to her side. Melanie, are you okay? Things around here have gotten really weird. The air's gone cold, everyone is gone, and now you... Jack? You're still out? I'm still out. What do you mean? Where is everyone else gone? Not just me. The others... She fell to her knees. Jack Thunder ran up to the window and peered inside. It wasn't just Melanie. The entire inside of the hut had lost all its color. Inside, Jack Thunder could make out the form of her cousin, Ember Moonbeam. She was in no better state. She was slumped against a beanbag on the opposite wall. Her purple jumpsuit had turned to faded lavender, and her red eyes had lost all of their luster. Jack Thunder ran over to the other nearby huts, looking into them one by one. Hut after hut was the same. Both the houses and the residents within had lost all their color and energy. That's when it hit him. The smell of the ozone that morning. The cold. The empty village. Hut after hut, gremlin after gremlin suffering the same gray affliction. They all pointed to one thing. Anima depletion. Something was stealing all of Tempest Island's anima, and Jack Thunder felt in his gut he knew exactly what it was. He raced home to fetch his staff. This just might be his chance. Son, Frosty, where's the staff? I need it. Wait, what's going on here? San turned from his map on the table. No time to explain. The island's come under a curse. I need the staff so I can find where it's coming from and defeat it. Now, where is it? What kind of curse? You're not thinking of banishing a Wendigo on your own, are you? Of course I am. I've learned so much. I'm ready, I swear. San stood up from his seat, grabbing the staff. Jack Thunder, you shouldn't be so excited about the prospect of banishing a Wendigo. It's a dangerous business. There is a reason why I didn't allow you to do it on your own. Jack Thunder fumed. The collective frustration of the past month reached boiling point, and he snapped. Then what was the point of training me then, huh? I've been working and working for weeks on end, and you still don't trust me. I've learned every single spell about handling them. Banishing spells, ward spells, the whole 9 yards. I'm so sick and tired of people telling me I'm not ready. You're not ready, Jack Thunder. You'll understand when you're older, Jack Thunder. Get out from under my feet, Jack Thunder. Well, you know what? This time, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna take care of this threat right here and now. Jack Thunder moved closer and closer, eventually moving to snatch the staff right out of San's hand. And there's nothing you can do to stop me! With that, Jack Thunder ran out of the house with the staff in hand. He ran until he had reached a small boulder near the outskirts of the town, where he hid. He didn't want San finding him. That's when he noticed Razor beside him. The Weather Wyvern had overheard the commotion and come out to join him on his quest. He looked at the storm gremlin with a lightly disapproving expression. I know. I'll apologize to him later. Right now, I need to figure out where this thing is coming from. Now, what did he say about Wendigos? Something about how you can tell where they are by how anima depleted the land is. He looked around. The village was anima depleted, all right. The colorlessness had spread to the outside of the huts now. It looked as if he were looking at a photograph and only a scant few of the huts had been rendered in full color. So if the corruption had spread that quickly, the Wendigo was not too far behind. Jack Thunder clutched Stormbringer in his hands and whispered an incantation for protection. He felt a wave of magic and calmness cascade over him. This should protect us. That's when he noticed the gemstone in the center of the staff pulsing. He swung it over to his left, and its pulses slowed. He swung it to his right, and the pulses quickened. Before he could wonder what this meant, he noticed that there were more depleted houses to his right than his left. That's when he felt a pull coming from his right. It was not pulling on his body, but on his soul, trying to suck the life right out of him. The staff must be tracking the Wendigo, he thought, putting 2 and 2 together. He took off once again, this time to the right. Razor trailed behind him all the way. Chapter 9. On the Hunt. Okay, this is a bit more difficult than I thought. Jack Thunder took a deep breath as he encircled Mount Tempest on a cloud, waving Stormbringer around, trying to find any sign he was getting closer. The staff pulsed faster when he got close to the mountain, so the Wendigo was in the mountain, but the storm gremlin wasn't sure exactly where it was. He had been going from cave to cave, looking for an entrance that would lead him to his target. Razor sat beside him, glancing at the mountain, the sky, anywhere he could to try to find a clue. All of a sudden, Razor chirped. "What is it, Razor? Did you find something?" Jack Thunder asked the Weather Wyvern. Razor tipped his head towards a cave near the top of the mountain. Jack Thunder gave him a worried look. "Are you sure?" Razor merely nodded in response. The two soared to the top of the mountain, up to the cave's entrance. Jack Thunder had never gone this high before, but this was definitely the right cave. Stormbringer was pulsing double time. So was Jack Thunder's heart. But as much as he would have liked to run all the way home and hide under the covers, he wasn't about to swallow his pride. San had told him he wasn't ready. He was about to prove his mentor wrong, that he could handle a Wendigo on his own. As Jack Thunder stepped into the cave, Razor remained outside. He let out a worried whimper as the storm gremlin disappeared into the black. Jack Thunder swallowed hard. There wasn't much he could see, not right offhand. Stormbringer's glow served as his torch, but it didn't do much to illuminate his way. As he traveled further into the cave, the glow seemed to grow dimmer, straining against an unnatural darkness. Even so, it pulsed with greater and greater speed. He was getting close. He jumped when he suddenly heard a voice. He couldn't make out what it was saying, but it sounded familiar. He knew this voice all too well. This voice belonged to the one storm gremlin he had never been able to get along with. His name was Terry Paradise. The two of them were different in almost every way. Jack Thunder had powers over storm clouds. Terry had powers over the sun. Jack Thunder wore green. Terry wore orange. Jack Thunder worked hard to prove himself. Terry just floated through life without a care. So why would he be in here? Why would a storm gremlin who hardly wanted for anything ever feel the need to take a bargain with a Wendigo? It didn't make sense. Jack Thunder turned at a sudden noise. Terry was 2 inches from his face. Jack Thunder yelped and staggered back, pointing Stormbringer's blades at the intruding storm gremlin. This was Terry, all right, but he didn't look so good. It was difficult to tell in the blackness, but Terry had lost his color too. He looked as pale and weathered as old, worn-out shoe leather. He had dark circles under his eyes, and his jumpsuit was covered in strange stains, like he had been down here for days without sleep or a proper bath. Jack Thunder noticed a viscous black substance leaking from Terry's mouth and realized to his horror that the stains on his jumpsuit trailed down from his mouth, splattering the entire front. Terry trembled as he stared haggardly back at Jack Thunder. Jack, is that you? Terry managed to get out. Jack Thunder knew it in his gut now. There was no question. These were all symptoms of Wendigo possession. He steadied himself. All right, I found the Wendigo. Now I just need to get it out and get it banished. He thought back to what San taught him about Wendigos. He remembered the protection spell he had cast on himself and Razor earlier. The spell used a special kind of magic called undifferentiated anima. It was the same kind of magic that the Wendigo banishing incantation used. If he could use it to cast a healing spell on Terry... Terry! What are you doing down here? You look awful! No, don't worry about me. You need to run. I'm not going to leave you here. Here, this should help with your wounds. And with that, Jack Thunder began casting the healing spell. The gemstone in the center of the staff shimmered with spectral light, as it had done when he'd cast the banishing spell. Terry seemed to calm down as the light washed over him. That didn't last long. Terry doubled over in pain, throwing up a gout of that horrid black substance that ran from his mouth earlier. Jack Thunder held steady, continuing to cast the spell. Terry's convulsions became more and more violent as he continued to cough up more and more black ooze. With the final retch, something else emerged from Terry's mouth. Something long, foul, and otherworldly. Something with a long, serpentine body and a pair of smoldering red eyes. It thrashed about madly, railing against the undifferentiated anima that had been forced into its host's body. Seeing the light coming from Stormbringer, the Wendigo shrieked and gave chase. Jack Thunder barely managed to duck out of the way before it slammed into the wall of the cave behind him. The Wendigo roared and whipped back around. Its form began to shift like a reflection in rippling water until it took the form of a full-grown weather wyvern, outfitted in pure, lightless black. Once again it gave chase, slamming into the opposite wall as Jack Thunder jumped out of the way once more. This Wendigo isn't very smart, Jack Thunder thought to himself. If it was resorting to the same tactics over and over, it must not have ventured far outside Tempest Island. Instantly his fear morphed into confidence. Bolts of green lightning shot out of the staff, striking the Wendigo in the back. It shrieked in pain, whipping around to chase him once again. On and on it went like this. The Wendigo would charge him, Jack Thunder would duck out of the way, and then shock it with lightning when it crashed into the wall behind him. As it bashed its head in again and again, stalactites from the ceiling of the cave quaked and fell. Jack Thunder grunted. Not only did he have to dodge the Wendigo's attacks, but now he was in danger of getting crushed by falling rocks. The Wendigo was not so lucky. The stalactites fell and shattered on its back. Black ooze trickled from the places where the stones had buried themselves into the Wendigo's form, and with every stone implanted in its back, the Wendigo's motions became slower and slower. Slowly but surely, it was turning into a stone statue. With a final zap from his staff, Jack Thunder saw the Wendigo slump to the floor. The rocks implanted in its form had effectively crystallized it, and the red glow from its eyes had faded to a rusty brown. "Now, Jack Thunder! Do the incantation!" The Storm Gremlin wasn't sure where the voice was coming from, but he wasn't one to argue with it. He pointed his staff at the defeated Wendigo. "Back to the flip side with you and your hate. You have no place in this land of dreams. We belong to Alterus. Alterus is ours." With every verse, the staff became encased in a white light, pulsing faster and faster. The Wendigo looked on in horror as it realized what was about to happen. "Now be gone!" And just like that, the light blasted at full speed towards the Wendigo. In the blink of an eye, the darkness of the cave was gone, replaced by a light so blinding that Jack Thunder winced and shut his eyes against it. Just over the blast, Jack Thunder swore he could hear the Wendigo screeching its final agonized protest as it was swept away. When he was able to open his eyes again, he could see the blast of light rushing out of the cave. A few seconds later, he heard a resounding explosion from outside. It was done. Chapter 10. A Brave Hero. Jack Thunder wiped the sweat off his brow as he looked around. To his relief, he could see again, and the staff had stopped pulsing. It let off a soft green glow, illuminating the cave. Most of the stalactites were gone, their remains left shattered on the floor. Many cracks decorated the walls, and Terry was nowhere to be seen. "Terry? Are you all right? Can you hear me?" Jack Thunder shouted, at this point not caring about setting off a cave-in. He just needed to know that the other Storm Gremlin was okay. "I'm right here, Jack." Terry poked his head out from behind a stalagmite closer to the entrance of the cave. The orange-clad Storm Gremlin must have had sense to flee the scene when things got really hairy. Standing next to him was the source of the voice Jack Thunder heard earlier, and the one being he had to thank for his victory. "Mr. San, I'm so sorry about earlier." Jack Thunder started apologizing. "I didn't mean all those things I said earlier. I was just so sick of being put aside, and I wanted to prove to you I could do it." "And you did." How did you find me?" Razor was sitting outside. "I heard a bunch of crashing noises, so I figured you must be down there. When I arrived, I found the cave destroyed and the Wendigo covered in rocks. Your friend here was backed up against the wall, so I picked him up and hid him here. That's when I shouted to you." All of a sudden, Razor came barreling down the path and leapt on top of Jack Thunder, bowling him over. The wyvern couldn't stop licking his face. All right, that's enough, Razor. I get it." Jack Thunder got up off the ground, turning to Terry. The latter's mouth was no longer dripping, but he still looked quite unwell, hunched over and staring at the ground with lidded eyes. "Come on," Jack Thunder told the ailing Storm Gremlin. "Let's go home." Terry could do nothing but nod in agreement. Yes, home. That sounded nice. When the three emerged from the cave, the sun was already setting. It hung low in the sky, painting it in hues of purple and pink and orange that could be seen even through the storm clouds of Tempest Island. Despite all the damage it had done, the Wendigo could not erase all of the color from the island, and though it would not be right away, all of the color and energy the island once had would be restored. And besides, the place they were taking Terry had enough anima for all of them. The orange-clad storm gremlin was in rough shape. Though the Wendigo no longer haunted him, his eyes still held a haunted appearance as he lumbered along, saliva still dripping from his mouth. He must have still been a bit nauseous. That was not to mention the damage that had been done to his outfit, which was now more black than orange, a victim to the inky substance that had spewed from Terry's mouth earlier. Both storm gremlins were grateful that, at least, it didn't smell. If it had smelled as bad as it looked, Terry was doubtful that he'd be able to hold any more of his stomach back. They could see it in the distance. It was impossible to miss. In the days of old, fairies flocked to lays, places in Alterus where one could restore one's magic if it were drained. Many of these had become lay spas, where healers treated the afflicted with herbs and healing magic. One of these buildings was just outside of the Storm Gremlin village. As they got closer, they could feel the anima of the island growing stronger as they approached the simple yet elegant structure in the distance. As soon as they walked in the door, everyone in the building froze in shock. Even aside from the fact that the air champion was with them, the sight of a scuffed-up Jack Thunder bracing an exhausted and sick Terry Paradise on his shoulder told them all they needed to know. The spa's managers rushed to their side. "Don't worry about me. He's the one who needs help," Jack Thunder insisted. "I've just got a few scrapes. I'll be fine." They didn't need to be told twice. They quickly whisked Terry away to another room to be treated. One of them, however, stayed behind, looking at San. Are you really San? The air champion of Alterus?" San sighed to himself. "That's not important. He needs your help," he answered, dodging the question. "You're in pretty rough shape yourself," the spa worker replied, glancing down at San's form. "Come on, ladies. Let's get this Tengu some TLC too." What? Wait, I don't... San tried to protest, but they whisked him away before he could get the words out. "Looks like I'm getting a spa day whether I want one or not." The healers pushed San past an endless array of rooms before arriving at the one where he was being treated. The Tengu had to marvel at the structure of the building. It had been a while since he had visited a lay, and he wasn't sure what to expect. When he stepped inside, he noticed that there was a small pool filled with steaming water in the middle of the floor. Even from this distance, he could smell that the water had been infused with a variety of healing herbs. Lavender, vanilla, and chamomile scents emanated throughout the room. When they instructed him to get in, he wasn't one to argue. Immediately, his nerves settled as he settled into the water. With that, the healers got to the task of working through San's head feathers. The combination of the soapy water and the healers plucking out his broken feathers one by one settled San. It reminded him of when his mother would preen him when he was a hatchling. After they had washed and preened the feathers on his head and chest, they set about working on his wings and tail. Here they were a little more careful, focusing their attention on the down feathers. Luckily, San's flight feathers were intact for the most part. When he finally got out of the water, San caught a glimpse of himself in the water, blurry at first, but sharper as the water stilled. He had been worried that with all those broken feathers gone, he would hardly have any left on his head. But no, they had done a really good job. He almost looked as good as when he first took up the Stormbringer all those years ago. Even when he stroked his head feathers back, they were soft and fluffy. Nothing like the stiff and dirty mop he had when he was languishing away in the Razor Frost range. His eyes held a spark of joy, but he remained stoic as he quietly thanked the healers for their work. He was still silent when he was led out of the room. They led him to the room where Terry was being held. The storm gremlin was also done with his spa treatment, and now he was resting on a cot in his recovery room. Standing next to him was Jack Thunder. Chapter 11. Mending Fences. The storm gremlins turned to look when they heard San coming through the door. Jack Thunder was the first to speak. "Oh, Mr. San, you're back. How did it go?" "Don't worry, I didn't need too much. They just washed and combed through my feathers is all." He cracked a smile for just a second before resuming his stoic attitude. "Ah," Jack Thunder's head dropped. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." "Sorry about what?" "About earlier. About snapping at you. About taking on the Wendigo by myself. Maybe I should have listened to you." "Jack," San replied, "if you hadn't gone after the Wendigo, your friend here would still be languishing in that cave. You've more than proved yourself worthy of wielding Stormbringer. Maybe you were a bit impulsive, but your heart is clearly in the right place. I admit I had my doubts about you earlier, but now I see that you're the best hope we have of saving our world." Jack Thunder couldn't believe what he was hearing. San thought he could handle it. Half of him was overjoyed and the other half was terrified. This was what he'd always wanted. He wanted to wield the staff from the very beginning. He wanted to measure up to San's hopes. But this was all starting to become too real for his liking. Not wanting to ponder it longer, he turned to Terry. "How did you get infected anyway? What reason would you have to make a deal with a Wendigo?" "I didn't make a deal, Jack. I didn't even know it had infected me until a few days ago. When I saw how you were training under San, I was so jealous. I started to have doubts about myself. I started thinking that maybe I should stop being so lazy and try and find a purpose in life. I think that's how the Wendigo got to me. It was just reflecting my own thoughts back to me, so I thought nothing of it. It was only when it started draining the rest of Tempest Island alongside me and that black fluid began dripping out of my mouth that I discovered the truth. I hid myself in the cave to protect the rest of the village, but..." Terry sighed. "Clearly it didn't work." Jack Thunder paused. Was that really how Terry felt? "You were jealous of me?" he asked, bemused. "Yes, why are you so surprised?" "Terry, you have the perfect life. I mean, everyone in the village loves you. You're a surfing champion both here and out on the surface. Meanwhile, I just summon storms that I can't control and cause havoc wherever I go. You didn't even lose your parents in the war like I did," Jack Thunder barked, his voice suddenly full of anguish. "If anyone should be wielding the staff, it's you." "No, I shouldn't, Jack," Terry countered firmly. "All I can do is clear the clouds away and surf. I don't have the drive to learn magic that you do. I'm sure you know more about magic than anyone in this village. But you're not just knowledgeable, you're brave. San's right. You're the best hope we have of saving our world." A heavy silence fell between them. Neither one knew what to say. Jack Thunder was the first to break the silence. Well, I think I need to be getting home now. Frosty's probably getting worried." "Wait." Jack Thunder paused. "If there's anything I can do to help, just call me. I'll help in any way I can." "All right, I'm gonna hold you to that." They both laughed. With their final goodbyes spoken, Jack Thunder and San left the room, and the spa, behind in the darkness. Jack Thunder sat on his bed. Razor was curled up beside him, snoring away. The storm gremlin was still trying to process the events of the day. He wondered if it had all been a dream, but the constant sting of his cleaned-up scrapes and aching muscles told him otherwise. Despite his exhaustion, he could not join Razor in rest just yet. San had gone into the other room to talk to Frosty. He couldn't hear them at all from where he was, and he was in no condition to get out of his bed to snoop. All he had the energy to do right now was sit and stare at the wall, listening to the rain pattering against his window. It was a sound he'd fallen asleep to many times. but tonight it only made the anticipation eat at him more. I wish they would hurry up and tell me what's going to happen so I can sleep. He jumped as he heard the knob click and the door open. Jackie, are you still awake? His sister called. Jack Thunder nodded. Frosty started. She sighed. Son told me about what happened today. He really respects what you did to save Terry. She took a deep breath. Maybe he's right. Maybe you are the best hope we have of saving our world. Jack Thunder stared blankly, not sure what to say. Look, Jackie, I didn't take Stormbringer away just because I thought you couldn't handle it. I didn't want you wielding it because I was scared. I was scared that you would end up dead, just like our mom and dad. She had tears in her eyes as she spoke. Frosty, Jack Thunder replied. I was thinking of them myself. I know they died protecting this world. I want them to have been proud of me. They would have been very proud of who you've become. It's not just that. I just get the feeling that if I become the new air champion, someday I'll be able to keep someone else from losing their mom and dad like we did. That's all I want. I know, honey, she replied, pulling her brother into an embrace. I shouldn't worry so much. Me and Son will be right there by your side. Just promise me one thing, okay? Jack Thunder nodded. If you go out there and get killed, you have to let me die too, all right? Deal. They continued to listen to the rain falling on the roof. Tomorrow the quest would begin, but for now, they could just rest. Chapter 12. Off to See the World. Jack Thunder woke up bright and early the next morning. He had no time to listen to the rain outside today. Today was going to be an exceptionally busy day. He threw himself off the bed, quickly getting himself dressed and grabbing Stormbringer from its position against the bedpost. He brought it over to his desk, along with a stack of books. He picked one off the top with the title, The War of the Wendigos and the Six Champions of Alterus, and cracked it open. He flipped through it for a while before landing on the page he was looking for. He began reading. The Fragments of Anima. The Fragments of Anima are the legendary weapons used to defeat the Heart of Darkness in the War of the Wendigos. These magical weapons are imbued with the raw powers of each of the elements of Anima. Together, they were able to summon a Wendigo banishing spell powerful enough to banish the Heart of Darkness and all of the Wendigos in Alterus and on Earth back to the flip side. Stormbringer. A powerful magical staff imbued with the power of air. It was created and wielded by San, a Tengu peasant who forged it from black metal, air crystals, and a bolt of lightning from atop Mount Tempest. With one wave, it could summon a tornado powerful enough to rip through the countryside like tissue paper. The Sea Stone. A gem bathed in the magic of the Sea of Forever. It was wielded by Mallow the Maelstrom, a siren who specialized in hand-to-hand combat. It had the power to raise and lower the tides to the wielder's will. Terra. A magical axe formed from the branches of Yggdrasil. It was gifted to Adamant Ironjaw, the strongest and most ambitious of her personal guards. It could heal its wielder, much like Yggdrasil herself, and it could create earthquakes when it was bashed against the ground. Yuki. A katana forged from the fires of the Temple of the Four Flames. It was forged and wielded by Altaria of Foxfire, formerly a low-ranking priestess in the temple who used her martial arts skills in the fight against the Wendigos. The weapon could both harm and heal, slicing through enemies with a flaming blade or burning away diseases with its potent flames. Excalibur. A broadsword imbued with the magic of one pure Eternus. When the war began, this demigod of youth sacrificed their youthful magic to empower Excalibur, aging them in the process. Like Yuki, Excalibur has both the power to hurt and heal, one of its abilities being the power to enlighten opponents and sway them over to the wielder's side. Lethal Joke. A dark-powered grenade launcher originally designed for fireworks shows. The great Strombolio, a performer in the Circus of Shadows, crafted it out of scraps of dismantled carnival rides. When he used it to successfully fend off a Wendigo invasion, he refilled it with laughing gas-filled grenades and bathed it in powerful dark magic. The grenades can cause massive structural damage and can cause their targets to begin laughing uncontrollably, rendering them unable to retaliate. Well, Jack Thunder already had Stormbringer at his side. That was 1 down, 5 to go. But how was he supposed to locate the others? He read on. After the Heart of Darkness was defeated, the rift where the Wendigos came from sealed with a bang. This sent the Fragments of Anima flying, scattering them all across Alterus. Here they wait to be rediscovered. That wasn't much help at all. It didn't say anything about where the fragments might be, not even an educated guess. He grunted before spotting another passage on the opposite page. The fragments of anima are sensitive to each other's presence. When 2 fragments are close to each other, they will begin to resonate with each other. A fragment's wielder may notice the fragment pulsing with energy. The pulse will get faster when the other fragment is close. Jack Thunder nodded. Just like when Stormbringer led me to the Wendigo. That would make things a lot easier for him. But there were still so many places the fragments could be. He didn't have time to check them all. Not when the Heart of Darkness's return was just around the corner. So what could he do? Jack Thunder sighed and looked over to his staff. To his surprise, the stone in the center was glowing, pulsing ever so slowly. The glow was different than before, though. Instead of the straight green it was when it sensed the Wendigo's presence, it was a deep indigo with overtones of peacock green. Jack Thunder knew what that meant. These colors were associated with the powers of water. Stormbringer had picked up the energy of the sea stone. Grabbing the staff, he burst out the front door, running all the way to the edge of the island. He looked down. Below him was a vast turquoise sea. Dotting that sea were 4 islands, green and teeming with tropical life. Not far from these islands, Jack Thunder could see the edge of Pandora, the land that made up the nursery rhyme district to the west. He felt a pull from Stormbringer going straight down. The staff was directing him to the turquoise archipelago. The storm gremlin made haste back to his house and began packing supplies. There was no time to waste. The crew was going on a tropical vacation. Alterus was counting on it.